Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. John Betjeman. Sir John Betjeman, CBE, was an English poet, writer, and broadcaster who described himself in Who's Who as a poet and hack. He was Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom from 1972 until his death. He was a founding member of the Victorian Society, and a passionate defender of Victorian architecture. He began his career as a journalist, and ended it as one of the most popular British Poets Laureate, and a much-loved figure on British television. Early life and education. Betjeman was born John Betjeman. His parents, Mabel and Ernest Betjeman, had a family firm at 3442 Pentonville Road which manufactured the kind of ornamental household furniture and gadgets distinctive to Victorians. The family name was changed to the less German-looking Betjeman during the First World War. His father's forebears had actually come from the present-day Netherlands and had, ironically, added the extra N during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War to avoid the anti-Dutch sentiment existing at the time. More than a century earlier, setting up their home and business in Islington, London, Betjeman was baptised at St Anne's Church, Highgate Rise, a 19th-century church at the foot of Highgate West Hill. The family lived at Parliament Hill Mansions in the Lissenden Gardens private estate in Gospel Oak in North London. In 1909, the Betjemans moved half a mile north to more opulent Highgate. From West Hill they lived in the reflected glory of the Burdick Coots estate. Here, from my eyrie, as the sun went down, I heard the old North London puff and shunt. Glad that I did not live in Gospel Oak. Betjeman's early schooling was at the local Byron House and Highgate School, where he was taught by poet T.S. Eliot. After this, he boarded at the Dragon School Preparatory School in New Oxford and Marlborough College, a public school in Wiltshire. In his penultimate year, he joined the secret society of Amici, in which he was a contemporary of both Lewis MacNeice and Graham Shepherd. He founded The Heretic, a satirical magazine that lampooned Marlborough's obsession with sport. While at school, his exposure to the works of Arthur Machen won him over to High Church Anglicanism, a conversion of importance to his later writing and conception of the arts. Magdalen College, Oxford. Betjeman entered the University of Oxford with difficulty, having failed the mathematics portion of the university's matriculation exam, responsons. He was, however, admitted as a commoner at Magdalen College, and entered the newly created School of English Language and Literature. At Oxford, Betjeman made little use of the academic opportunities. His tutor, a young C.S. Lewis, regarded him as an idle prig, and Betjeman in turn considered Lewis unfriendly, demanding, and uninspired as a teacher. Betjeman particularly disliked the coursework's emphasis on linguistics, and dedicated most of his time to cultivating his social life, and his interest in English ecclesiastical architecture, and to private literary pursuits. At Oxford he was a friend of Maurice Bower, later to be Warden of Wadham. Betjeman had a poem published in Isis, the university magazine, and served as editor of the Cherwell student newspaper during 1927. His first book of poems was privately printed with the help of fellow student Edward James. He famously brought his teddy bear Archibald Ormsby Gore up to Magdalen with him, the memory of which inspired his Oxford contemporary Evelyn Waugh to include Sebastian Flight's Teddy Aloysius in Brideshead Revisited. Much of this period of his life is recorded in his blank verse autobiography Summoned by Bells, published in 1960 and made into a television film in 1976. It is a common misapprehension, cultivated by Betjeman himself, that he did not complete his degree, because he failed to pass the compulsory Holy Scripture examination, known colloquially as Divs, short for Divinity. In Hilary term 1928, Betjeman failed Divinity for the second time. He had to leave the university for the Trinity term to prepare for a retake of the exam. He was then allowed to return in October. Betjeman then wrote to the secretary of the tutorial board at Magdalen, G.C. Lee, asking to be entered for the past school, a set of examinations taken on rare occasions by undergraduates who are deemed unlikely to achieve an honors degree. In Summoned by Bells, Betjeman claims that his tutor, C.S. Lewis, said, "You'd have only got a third." But he had informed the tutorial board that he thought Betjeman would not achieve an honors degree of any class. Permission to sit the past school was granted. Betjeman famously decided to offer a paper in Welsh. Osbert Lancaster tells the story that a tutor came by train twice a week from Aberystwyth to teach Betjeman. However, Jesus College had a number of Welsh tutors who more probably would have taught him. Betjeman finally had to leave at the end of the Michaelmas term, 1928. Betjeman did pass his divinity examination on his third try, but was sent down after failing the past school. He had achieved a satisfactory result in only one of the 3 required papers. Betjeman's academic failure at Oxford rankled with him for the rest of his life, and he was never reconciled with C.S. Lewis, towards whom he nursed a bitter detestation. This situation was perhaps complicated by his enduring love of Oxford, from which he accepted an honorary doctorate of letters in 1974. After university, Betjeman left Oxford without a degree. Whilst there, however, he had made the acquaintance of people who would later influence his work, including Lewis MacNeice and W. H. Auden. He worked briefly as a private secretary, school teacher and film critic for the Evening Standard, where he also wrote for their high society gossip column, The Londoner's Diary. He was employed by the Architectural Review between 1930 and 1935 as a full-time assistant editor, following their publishing of some of his freelance work. Timothy Mole says, his years at the Architectural Review were to be his true university. At this time, while his prose style matured, he joined the Mars Group, an organization of young modernist architects and architectural critics in Britain. Betjeman's sexuality can best be described as bisexual, and his longest and best documented relationships were with women. And a fairer analysis of his sexuality may be that he was the hatcher of a lifetime of schoolboy crushes, both gay and straight, most of which progressed no further. Nevertheless, he has been considered temperamentally gay, and even became a pen pal of Lord Alfred Bosie Douglas of Oscar Wilde fame. On the 29th of July 1933 he married the Hon. Penelope Chetwood, the daughter of Field Marshal Lord Chetwood. The couple lived in Berkshire and had a son, Paul, in 1937, and a daughter, Candida, in 1942. In 1937, Betjeman was a church warden at Uffington, the Berkshire town where he lived. That year, he paid for the cleaning of the church's royal arms, and later presided over the conversion of the church's oil lamps to electricity. The Shell guides were developed by Betjeman and Jack Beddington, a friend who was publicity manager with Shell Mex Limited, to guide Britain's growing number of motorists around the counties of Britain and their historical sites. They were published by the Architectural Press and financed by Shell. By the start of World War II, 13 had been published, of which Cornwall and Devon were written. by Betjeman. A third, Shropshire, was written with and designed by his good friend John Piper in 1951. In 1939, Betjeman was rejected for active service in World War II, but found war work with the film's division of the Ministry of Information. In 1941 he became British press attaché in neutral Dublin, Ireland, working with Sir John Maffei. He may have been involved with the gathering of intelligence. He is reported to have been selected for assassination by the IRA. The order was rescinded after a meeting with an unnamed old IRA man who was impressed by his works. Betjeman wrote a number of poems based on his experiences in emergency World War II Ireland, including The Irish Unionists' Farewell to Greta Hellstrom in 1922, which contained the refrain, Dungarvan in the Rain. The object of his affections, Greta, has remained a mystery until recently revealed to have been a member of a well-known Anglo-Irish family of Western County Waterford. His official brief included establishing friendly contacts with leading figures in the Dublin literary scene. He befriended Patrick Kavanagh, then at the very start of his career. Kavanagh celebrated the birth of Betjeman's daughter with a poem, Candida. Another well-known poem contains the line, "Let John Betjeman call for me in a car." After World War II, Betjeman's wife Penelope became a Roman Catholic in 1948. The couple drifted apart, and in 1951 he met Lady Elizabeth Cavendish, with whom he developed an immediate and lifelong friendship. By 1948 Betjeman had published more than a dozen books. 5 of these were verse collections, including one in the USA. Sales of his collected poems in 1958 reached 100,000. The popularity of the book prompted Ken Russell to make a film about him. John Betjeman, a Poet in London, filmed in 35mm and running 11 minutes and 35 seconds. It was first shown on BBC's Monitor programme. He continued writing guidebooks and works on architecture during the 1960s and 1970s and started broadcasting. He was a founder member of the Victorian Society. Betjeman was closely associated with the culture and spirit of Metroland, as outer reaches of the Metropolitan Railway were known before the war. In 1973 he made a widely acclaimed television documentary for the BBC called Metroland, directed by Edward Mears, on the centenary of Betjeman's birth in 2006. His daughter led 2 celebratory railway trips, from London to Bristol, and through Metroland to Quainton Road. In 1974, Betjeman and Mears followed up Metroland with A Passion for Churches, a celebration of Betjeman's beloved Church of England, filmed entirely in the Diocese of Norwich. In 1975, he proposed that the fine rooms of Somerset House should house the Turner bequest, so helping to scupper the plan of the Minister for the Arts for a theatre museum to be housed there. In 1977 the BBC broadcast The Queen's Realm, A Prospect of England, an aerial anthology of English landscape, music and poetry, selected by Betjeman and produced by Edward Mears, in celebration of the Queen's Silver Jubilee. Betjeman was fond of the ghost stories of M.R. James and supplied an introduction to Peter Haining's book M.R. James' Book of the Supernatural. He was susceptible to the supernatural. Diana Mitford tells the story of Betjeman staying at her country home, Biddesden House, in the 1920s. She says, he had a terrifying dream, that he was handed a card with wide black edges, and on it his name was engraved, and a date. He knew this was the date of his death. For the last decade of his life Betjeman suffered increasingly from Parkinson's disease. He died at his home in Trebetherick, Cornwall on 19 May 1984, aged 77, and is buried nearby at St. Enodox Church. Poetry. Betjeman's poems are often humorous, and in broadcasting he exploited his bumbling and fogyish image. His wryly comic verse is accessible and has attracted a great following for its satirical and observant grace. Auden said in his introduction, "To slick but not streamlined, so at home with the provincial gaslit towns, the seaside lodgings, the bicycle, the harmonium." His poetry is similarly redolent of time and place, continually seeking out intimations of the eternal in the manifestly ordinary. There are constant evocations of the physical chaff and clutter that accumulates in everyday life, the miscellanea of an England now gone, but not beyond the reach of living memory. He talks of Ovaltine and Sturmey Archer bicycle gears, Fuller's angel cake, Robertson's marmalade. He writes, "Liberty lampshades, come shine on us all." In a 1962 radio interview he told teenage questioners that he could not write about abstract things, preferring places and faces. Philip Larkin wrote of his work, "How much more interesting and worth writing about Betjeman's subjects are than most other modern poets, I mean. Whether so-and-so achieves some metaphysical inner unity is not really so interesting to us as the overbuilding of rural Middlesex." Betjeman was a practicing Anglican, and his religious beliefs come through in some of his poems. He combined piety with a nagging uncertainty about the truth of Christianity. Unlike Thomas Hardy, who disbelieved in the truth of the Christmas story while hoping it might be so, Betjeman affirms his belief even while fearing it might be false. In the poem, Christmas, one of his most openly religious pieces, the last three stanzas that proclaim the wonder of Christ's birth do so in the form of a question. And is it true? His views on Christianity were expressed in his poem, The Conversion of St. Paul, a response to a radio broadcast by humanist Margaret Knight, but most of us turn slow to see the figure hanging on a tree, and stumble on and blindly grope, upheld by intermittent hope. God grant before we die we all may see the light as did St. Paul. Betjeman became Poet Laureate of the United Kingdom in 1972, the first Knight Bachelor to be appointed. This role, combined with his popularity as a television performer, ensured that his poetry reached an audience enormous by the standards of the time. Similarly to Tennyson, he appealed to a wide public and managed to voice the thoughts and aspirations of many ordinary people while retaining the respect of many of his fellow poets. This is partly because of the apparently simple traditional metrical structures and rhymes he uses. In the early 1970s, he began a recording career of 4 albums on Charisma Records, which included Betjeman's Banana, Blush and Late Flowering Love, where his poetry reading is set to music with overdubbing by leading musicians of the time. His recording catalogue extends to 9 albums, 4 singles, and 2 compilations. Betjeman and architecture. Betjeman had a fondness for Victorian architecture, and was a founding member of the Victorian Society. He wrote on this subject in First and Last Loves and more extensively in London's historic railway stations in 1972. Defending the beauty of 12 stations, he led the campaign to save Holy Trinity, Sloane Street in London when it was threatened with demolition in the early 1970s. He fought a spirited, but unsuccessful campaign to save the Propylaeum, known commonly as the Euston Arch, London. He is considered instrumental in helping to save St Pancras Railway Station, London, and was commemorated when it became an international terminus for Eurostar in November 2007. He called the plan to demolish St Pancras a criminal folly. About it he wrote, "What the Londoner sees in his mind's eye is the cluster of towers and pinnacles seen from Pentonville Hill and outlined against a foggy sunset, and the great arc of Barlow's train shed gaping to devour incoming engines, and the sudden burst of exuberant Gothic of the hotel seen from gloomy Judd Street." On the reopening of St Pancras Station in 2007, a statue of Betjeman was commissioned from curators Future City. A proposal by artist Martin Jennings was selected from a short list. The finished work was erected in the station at platform level, including a series of slate roundels depicting selections of Betjeman's writings. Betjeman was given the remaining 2-year lease on Victorian Gothic architect William Burgess' Tower House in Holland Park upon leaseholder Mrs. E.R.B. Graham's death in 1962. Betjeman felt he could not afford the financial implications of taking over the house permanently, with his potential liability for £10,000 of renovations upon the expiration of the lease. After damage from vandals, restoration began in 1966. Betjeman's lease included furniture from the house by Burgess, and Betjeman gave 3 pieces: the Zodiac Settle, the Narcissus washstand, and the Philosophy Cabinet, to Evelyn Waugh. Betjeman responded to architecture as the visible manifestation of society's spiritual life as well as its political and economic structure. He attacked speculators and bureaucrats for what he saw as their opacity and lack of imagination. In the preface of his collection of architectural essays First and Last Loves he says, "We accept the collapse of the fabrics of our old churches, the thieving of leaden objects from them, the commandeering and butchery of our scenery by the services, the despoiling of landscaped parks and the abandonment to a fate worse than the workhouse of our country houses, because we are convinced we must save money." In a BBC film made in 1968 but not broadcast at the time, Betjeman described the sound of Leeds to be of Victorian buildings crashing to the ground. He went on to lambast John Powelson's British Railways house, saying how it blocked all the light out to City Square and was only a testament to money with no architectural merit. He also praised the architecture of Leeds Town Hall. In 1969, Betjeman contributed the foreword to Derek Lindstrom's Historic Architecture of Leeds. Betjeman was for over 20 years a trustee of the Bath Preservation Trust and was vice president from 1965 to 1971. At a time when Bath, a city rich in Georgian architecture, was coming under increasing pressure from modern developers, and a major road was proposed to cut across it. He also created a short television documentary called Architecture of Bath, in which he voiced his concerns about the way the city's architectural heritage was being mistreated. From 1946 to 1948 he had served as secretary to the Oxford Preservation Trust. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.